Hello, welcome to 8.9 News. I'm Costain. While progress has been made to reduce the use of routine antibiotics in animal agriculture, there is now a fear that a recent decision by the World Health Organization to change the way it classifies macrolides could be taken as a green light for their increased use. Dr. Laura Higham is a veterinary consultant for FAI Farms. I asked her what macrolides are and what's changed.
Yeah, so macrolides are a class of antibiotic widely used in human and animal medicine. And they have been classified by the World Health Organization prior to February this year as being what's called a highest priority critically important antibiotic. And in February, this list the World Health Organization publish downgraded macrolides from being HPCIAs, as we call them, down to critically important antibiotics. Now, this list that the World Health Organization publishes is regularly refreshed to reflect evidence of which medicines we should be preserving as highly important to human medicine and which pose a threat when they're used in animals in terms of the potential emergence of pathogens that could cause a threat to human health. And so this list was refreshed in February this year. And the major change, as we see it at FAI, is the downgrading of macrolides to being a critically important antibiotic.
And this is to do with the danger for human beings of overuse and therefore the increased level of resistance to antibiotics?
That's right. And there's no change in that per se, in that macrolides, when used in animals, they present a risk of emergence of resistant foodborne pathogens, for example, Campylobacter. But what has changed is, after consultation, the World Health Organization have concluded that actually these Campylobacter infections, although they're quite prevalent, they're not necessarily life-limiting or particularly serious for people in the vast majority of cases. So they're generally considered to be self-limiting and often don't actually require usage of an antibiotic in a human patient. However, what concerns us at FAI is not necessarily this evidence, which is obviously very well backed by the World Health Organization and partners and various consultants, but the fact that there may be unintended consequences of this downgrade in the classification of macrolides. We know that macrolides are used fairly extensively in animal health settings, and they're really important for animal health and welfare, that's for certain. But there's a potential risk, as we see it at FAI, that this represents, or this could be read as a green light to certain organisations and producers to use macrolides more regularly and potentially in various global settings for the prevention of infections.
So just to go back to basics, why is it important to end the routine use of antibiotics on farms?
Yeah, well, the basic response to that would be, of course, that we need to be limiting the emergence of resistance organisms for both human and animal health and also environmental health. Antimicrobial resistance is the quintessential One Health issue, in that it can emerge in human and animal individuals, but it can circulate within the environment and have unintended consequences to environmental organisms as well, and enter what's called the resistome, this kind of ongoing cycle of resistance determinants, be they resistant bacteria or resistance genes, through the pool of animals, people and environmental organisms, and present an ongoing global threat to human and animal health. So this is the primary concern, is that overuse and long-term use of antibiotics, be that in a treatment, a metaphylactic, a prophylactic, which means prevention, or even growth promotion type context, all of these uses can foster antimicrobial resistance. So it's absolutely paramount that we see these as very vital, almost like non-renewable resources that we need to protect in order to protect One Health, essentially. The other reason, of course, is that the prevention of infection potentially masks ongoing and underlying problems with a production system, with a husbandry system, with a set of management practices, with a set of breeds that are used in production, all of those things. And so we don't want to be masking those issues. We want to actually be unearthing them and addressing them in a more sustainable way.
And how much progress has actually been made in Britain, but also globally?
Yeah, the progress against antimicrobial usage has been really, really promising and actually really commendable, particularly in the UK sectors. So the recently published veterinary antibiotic sales and surveillance report that's regularly published by the Veterinary Medicines Directorate shows that actually we've had a 59% reduction in antimicrobial use in farmed animal species in the UK between 2014 and 2022, which is of course more than half usage is slashed, and that is fantastic, and due to the efforts of many animal sectors, and also the likes of RUMA and their targets task force, which has really drilled down on how we reduce that usage and put in place reasonable targets. Across the world, the picture is also similarly commendable, although a slightly lower level in reductions. For example, the World Organization for Animal Health charted a 13% reduction between 2017 and 2019 across the vast majority of countries across the world in animal sectors. And similarly, a European study showed a 21% reduction in usage in farmed animals between 2017 and 2019. So those more recent figures chart a slightly lower reduction, but really, again, good progress, especially against a backdrop of peer-reviewed papers that did suggest we were going to be looking at much greater increases in usage of antibiotics across food animals. But just to caveat that progress, that is of course based on the data that we have available. So as long as that data is relatively robust, then we've got a good picture in front of us. But what we would say is that we really don't need to be taking our foot off the pedal in terms of this progress. There is plenty of occasions and incidences of unjudicious antibiotic use across the human and animal sectors that we still need to focus on, and there's lots of work that remains to be done.
Now, managing disease risk is presumably at the heart of continuing antibiotic use. So what are the alternatives to routine medications?
Yeah, so at FAI, we often embed what we describe as the 3 R's of antimicrobial stewardship into the policies that we draft for our clients across the food sectors in the UK and in global food supply chains. This stands for reduce, replace, and refine. And it's in line with, of course, the traditionally used 3 R's principles that was historically used in animal usage and experimentation. But we've reused it for the problem of antimicrobial stewardship, and it's been really helpful and effective at sort of providing a framework for reduction and stewardship. So the first one, of course, is reduce, and that would involve removing sort of the incidences of unnecessary use of antibiotics. Again, routine prophylactic and group treatments, and reducing the use of highest priority, critically important antibiotics that is broadly supported to be in line with antimicrobial stewardship in terms of preserving those antibiotics for human health. Refine, let's whip to the last one, but refine is all about those instances where we know that antibiotic usage in an animal is really necessary to protect their health and welfare. And in that case, it'd be all about sort of complying with the veterinary prescription in terms of route, dosage, frequency, withdrawal period, storage and disposal methods, and making sure that compliance in that animal setting is bang on in line with that prescription as per veterinary advice. And then the one that perhaps we're getting at here is all about replace, and this one is perhaps a little bit more systemic, in that sometimes we'll see antibiotic usage as a red flag for an underlying problem, and so in those cases we might look to the production system and the practices that are deployed in that setting, and look at things like herd health planning and flock health planning. Do we have the right vaccinations in place? Do we have the right hygiene, the right building maintenance, and the right building structures to ensure animal health and welfare?
And presumably breed comes into that as well.
Exactly, yeah. So the next one would certainly be looking at robust, high welfare breeds. There's lots of evidence that the slower growing breeds, when they're used in Scandinavia, has been accompanied by a drop in antibiotic usage. So those birds are potentially healthier and in a higher state of welfare, which then leads to less stress and sort of better production outcomes in terms of antibiotic use, as well as welfare outcomes too. And that could be translated across a number of different species too. We might look at, again, lower stress production systems, look at things like stocking density, look at things like early weaning in certain species. Are those things appropriate, and can we change them? And then at the end, something perhaps a bit more systemic again, is looking at the production system itself. At FAI, we of course have lots of regenerative agriculture programs, both on our own farm in Oxford and also within the supply chain of our clients. And we see in those settings that that classically antibiotic usage is very low. And that's also supported by other agroecological systems within peer-reviewed publications that suggest that systems like organic are generally associated with much lower levels of antibiotic usage compared to some of the indoor and more intensive animal settings. So we might look at introducing those sorts of principles, agroecological principles, in discussions with producers and food supply chains. So all in all, the replace principle is perhaps looking more at the root causes and perhaps making quite substantial changes.
And Laura, just finally, AI seems to be being touted as providing hope that new antibiotics may be discovered. Is this hope real?
I think AI and sort of new mechanisms for discovering new antimicrobial molecules are exciting, and they're very interesting. Of course, we do need a new pipeline of antimicrobials to serve better human and animal health and environmental health too. So that's without doubt something that needs to be investigated. But what does concern me is the idea of sort of silver bullet solutions. We need to get better at preserving and managing and stewarding our existing antimicrobial arsenal, our toolbox that we already have. We've seen a demise in the efficacy of virtually all of the antibiotics that are in use across the animal and human settings. That's just natural, it's natural selection. But we are, although we've made progress certainly in managing those resources, we do need to get more competent in that across all health spheres. And so what concerns me is that with the discovery and the marketing and the commercialization of new molecules, that they will undergo the same threats and undergo the same process that we've seen with all of our existing antibiotics, in that they'll of course be subject to resistance in the supply chains, certainly of animals, but also in human medicine too. So I do think we need to get better at that alongside these routes for new discovery.
That was Dr. Laura Higham from FAI Farms. More news on our website, 8.9.com. That's all for now. We're back soon. Thanks for watching.